Well, welcome back, everyone. Next, I'd like to invite Kim Stone, Sustainability Analyst at EQ Building Performance, to introduce our next panel. Kim, do you want to come up?
Hello, everybody. My name is Kim Stone, and I'm here to represent EQ Building Performance. If you haven't heard of us yet, we used to be part of Provident, which is a leading provider of submetering and building automation systems. EQ was established in 2017 to focus on our core consulting services, which includes energy modeling, sustainability, and building commissioning. We are a collaborative consulting firm who brings together architects, developers, and building owners to create high-performance buildings and communities. Our team of professionals apply integrated design and computer simulation to influence projects and use post-occupancy metering and performance data to test and validate our design tools. If you see myself or another EQ team member around today, please do not hesitate to say hello and chat. We're always looking to collaborate and expand our team. Moving on to the speakers. So we have two presenters for today. Drew Adams, who will be presenting Uninsulated Walls, Leaky Envelope, Zero Carbon. Can the heritage character of a century-old shed be maintained while activating zero carbon? Drew Adams is an architect at LGA Architectural Partners in Toronto, where he focuses on the adaptive resource reuse of historic and post-industrial buildings. As project architect, Drew currently leads Evergreen Brick Works' carbon-neutral retrofit of Historic Kiln Building. His portfolio includes laneway houses, the design of carbon-neutral multi-unit demonstration project of Yellowknife, and competition-winning net zero affordable housing design in San Francisco. And our second speaker today will be Scott Armstrong. Can facade design and retrofits contribute to healthier cities? Scott is passionate about buildings, their design and construction, ongoing performance, deterioration and failure, and ultimately their renewal. His projects have spanned commercial, institutional, heritage, recreational, residential, and neighborhood development in Canada, the Caribbean, and the Middle East. Scott has 20 years' experience in high-performance buildings, building enclosures, facades, existing buildings, repair and renewal, roofing, and green roofs, and integrated design. So please welcome Drew Adams to start.
Thank you. I'm very excited to share this project with everyone today. I've been working on this for the past 2 years. My name is Drew Adams. I'm from LGA Architectural Partners, and I think everyone still seems to know us as Levitt Goodman Architects. So just to put this in context, where we are here is Evergreen Brick Works compared to where we are downtown near Yonge Dundas Square. And for those of you who don't know or aren't familiar with the story of Evergreen Brick Works, it was the Don Valley Brick Works from 1889 to 1984 when the site was abandoned. And during those years since its abandonment, nature kind of started to take its course, and the site became a hotbed for raves, parties, urban explorers, photographers, and a lot of graffiti artists there. And what's interesting about the site, which is heritage designated, is it's just barely over 100 years old since it was built out, but a large portion of that history is this time that was abandoned. Here you can see the Evergreen Brick Works today as it was reimagined as a hub for community, for sustainability, and for city building. The Kiln Building, which I have a tendency to refer also to as Building 16, is this largest building on the east side of the site. For those of you in the audience, you probably know the building for the site for its LEED Platinum main new building, the Center for Sustainable Cities, for its programming, which includes farmers markets, winter activities, events, and so forth. And this really is a special place in the city that connects people with the city's past, its future, and with the environment. So in 2016, in November, we kind of got the call that we needed to transform the Kiln Building. And we said, oh yeah, sure, great, this is fantastic. And then the kind of next comment was, we have to go fast, really, really fast. And we'll build it, and we'll design one stage, permit one stage, and build one stage all at the same time. and that we also need to use it while we build it. So it's going to be continuously occupied during construction. And we also have to get 2 heritage authorities on site. The site is managed by the Heritage Preservation Services at the City of Toronto, as well as the Ontario Heritage Trust. And once we get both those on side, we have to go to the Heritage Preservation Board, and then it goes to Community Council, and then it has to go to City Council before we get our building permit. And the reason we had to go so fast is from November, we had to finish about $2.5 million of construction by the end of March to get the government funding that was going to kickstart this project. And just by the way, it floods inside the building and actively. And let's make it carbon neutral was kind of that was the essence of the call. And we said, okay, let's do this. This is going to be fun and crazy, and it's what really gets us excited. And so in terms of thinking about the building as a carbon neutral building, what I want to talk today about really is the approach and the building systems, and less so about the embodied footprint and the process energy. And just a note on those, the embodied footprint, we didn't really have the luxury of time to do the type of detailed analysis that we typically would like to do on a project like this on the footprint, but it is being, an analysis is being done after the project is complete to look at that, as well as accounting for the process energy through work with Ellis Dawn, and Evergreen has an eye to offsetting that in the future. So as I said, this is the site as it stands today, the kiln building on the very east side of the site. And when we started this project, part of the conversation was how do we make the whole campus carbon neutral or net zero? What is the appropriate standards? And so, well, the main building that was built out in 2008 was appropriate at the time as new construction as LEED Platinum. We started to think, well, maybe it's really a campus of high performance buildings, that each building lends itself to a different approach. You know, you've got a small punched window building with less heritage issues on the west, and maybe it's passive house, maybe do double skin facade on the main most prominent building, and maybe we're thinking about carbon neutral for the kiln building. This was the kiln building when we got it or started our work. So the graffiti that you see there, that's all heritage designated, so you can't touch that on the inside of the envelope. You can't touch the outside of the envelope because it's also heritage designated brick facade. The roof is lacking structure, so you can just barely put any insulation on the roof. The floor is also heritage designated because what you can kind of barely see in this image are these original rail network that carted the bricks. This building was also the building that had the kilns to fire the bricks that really were shipped all across the city and province. And so I don't know what this is, but the interesting thing about the building is that it was designed in a lot of ways to leak heat, because firing bricks is producing a ton of heat. So we inherited a building that was designed to get rid of heat as effectively as possible, which was not really helpful to us. You'll see in the next slide, but in fairness, when we really started the project, it wasn't quite in November 2016. We had been working with Evergreen on some feasibility and brainstorming out the project a little bit before that, so we kind of had a running start on it. But what that meant was that we started the project by talking about how we shift thinking on the project. How do we minimize energy use, and how do we push an agenda recognizing that we can't insulate the building, and how do we start to change the ideas about demand? And what that meant was changing ideas about occupant comfort and perceptions of comfort, because we can't get it ever to be a fully Class A type condition space all year long. And what that meant was that we started with an approach of changing perceptions about comfort. And so we looked at systems that heated people, not the space. So there's a lot of radiant heating being used. And we looked at approaches where you could use ceiling fans, inoperable windows, and skylights to move air in the summer months that would also induce a feeling that you were cooler than the temperature in the room actually was. This is a floor plan of the Evergreen Brick Works as it is right now, and what's projected. So the building that everyone knows as is in here. This is the big new building. This is a hillside ravine. This is the gardens. And right here, there is an easement for the CN rail going that way. So it's a very kind of compact footprint. These blue areas are the original kilns. The one on the kind of more bottom is the drying kilns where the bricks were dried, and the top portion was the firing kilns, and they would run the bricks from the left side of the screen to the right. And all the other gray area that you see, that floor has been raised in part due to the flooding, and the blue area that you see right there is areas where you can experience the original floor and footprint of the kilns exactly how they were. The rest of the program is these two large event spaces, about 1,100 people that fit in the bottom corner there, and a smaller space in the north, and it's perfectly suited to host the conference there next year, of course. The two main new program interventions, one is a classroom mezzanine. So you see that here floating above the kilns here, and this thing gets sandwiched ever so perfectly between the top of the heritage kilns that we couldn't touch and the underside of the steel roof structure. And the other element is a freestanding new gender-neutral washroom. This is a kind of typical section that I think really tells the story of what we did in one image. And so beginning with this area, this is the kind of original lowered floor area. We've raised the floor in here to get out of the what we kept calling as the nuisance floods, which is the 2- and 5-year floods. The 10-year flood is about half an inch above the floor, so they're pretty covered for that as well. The water, as it lands on the site, begins to get captured in these swales and drain around the building. It's captured roof water, gets captured and used for irrigation, as you'd expect. It's also used to supply the toilets in the washroom. The major systems in the building to condition the space is really being driven by a solar thermal array of about 250 panels and a 40 borehole field for geothermal, and those get interconnected. I'm not a mechanical engineer, so I can't say specifically how that all is connected and pumped, but that is providing nearly all of this the space heating and cooling in the building, and that is really what is positioned this as not quite carbon neutral, but we're very nearly at carbon neutral on the system's energy from that regard. With respect to the electricity, the site does get its energy from Bullfrog Power, and that, in the context of this project and the other constraints, was something that we set aside and didn't really look at any further than that because of the time constraints and whatnot we have. You'll also see, and just a note on the bore field, we couldn't actually do any more than that because of that CN easement. So you could imagine in that time frame how long it would take to negotiate with CN to put a geothermal system on their easement. You also see here the classroom mezzanine kind of tucked in there, and a lot of really fantastic operable skylights that Velux is supplied to the project. As I said, the site floods a lot. They have a very complex matrix and system for tracking flooding and risk, and this is, I think, the kind of picture in 1,000 words of the site. The bottom right picture there is the site. Our building actually flooded a number of years ago. In the last 10 years since they've been there, they've been hit by the 100-year storm twice, and the 50-year storm once. So it's not like a kind of subtle thing that happens and hits them. And just to really drive that home, you can see here our raised floor in this image with the person on top of it, and the 100-year storm is like head level on this person. So it's a really serious event when it happens. The classroom mezzanine actually provides a bit of a place of refuge during those events. So how do we really start to do that floor in a kind of technical sense? The floor is actually quite interesting. I think one of the more interesting aspects of the project, but what we started with was these cupola X forms. They're these plastic forms, and they displaced about 25,000 cubic feet of concrete and the carbon related to that. The cupola X also allowed us to do two other things. One was move water under the floor, and thirdly, make very few points of contact with the existing floor, which satisfied the heritage people from the standpoint that hypothetically in the future, if you had to, this whole intervention was reversible. Because of course that's what we're going to do after we do this type of intervention is take it all out again. But that's what they needed to be to hang their hat on. And so Above that, there's a quick layer, a small layer of concrete, and then a low strength but high R value insulating concrete. And this is the first time it was used inside of a building. We're told it's supplied by CRH and Dufferin. It's called Foamcrete. I think we got about R8 or so out of 5 inches, which also helped the sequencing with the trades and created an insulated buffer so that the radiant tubing that's on top of that pushes the heat upwards into the building and not down into the ground. In the top layer, there was a number of things we had to do to satisfy the heritage folks, including these embedded metal rails and tinting to interpret that. This area is the original floor that's been left as is. You can experience that part of the building as it always was, which was major for them. Here on the left side, you see the cupola X forms beginning to be installed. You also see some of the original rails that are about to be covered up. And then on the right side, you can see the radiant tubing having been installed and the steel rails that are about to be cast into the floor to reinterpret that original element of the building. This is that same area as it's been finished now. It's still been in progress. One of the other things that we did, I think, which was an interesting change in approach and mindset in the building was with respect to the flooding. You know, the one approach is put in a really hard infrastructure, put tons of pumps on backups and all sorts of things like that. But in this case, what we couldn't do was destroy the floor because it was a heritage element. And how do you then get the water into these pump pits if you can't go lower than the floor is going to be? And so what we've done is working with Evergreen and their attitude of use about it is really change that conversation from being about a fixed infrastructure that's trying to predict where the floodwater is going to come, which they don't know as it's changed numerous times. And instead, what we've created is a series of openings in the floor where they can drop in portable pumps. And when the building floods, Evergreen and their operations team are actually out there with portable pumps moving around the building. And the real objective of Evergreen is that this building floods on Saturday, filled up with mucky water from the dawn. And on Sunday, they have drained the water, cleaned it up, and it is fine for the wetting to proceed on Sunday. So that's really the MO. It was changing from this kind of 20th century idea about fixed infrastructure to a 21st century thinking of like, let's just make it all flexible. Evergreen can come in and pump out where they need to, and there's a few openings in the envelope that allows them to pump the water out. Here we're looking south in the building across the main event space. You see again here the interpretation of the rails. In this case, it had been sandblasted into the concrete floor. This is another view, and I think what you can really see in this, which is fantastic, is the way that these are the new embedded steel rails and how they pick up the language of the kilns. And a lot of our work when we got this site was looking at it and saying, look, the only thing we can do is make this really special building worse. And I think that was a really key learning point because it's such a fantastic heritage building. And so a lot of the work is extremely minimal. There's a lot of infrastructure that has gone into the building to make it conditioned and occupiable. A lot of my time was spent working with the plumber and the HVAC people to make sure that the ducts and pipes actually lined up on site with things that were existing that we couldn't predict in the drawings. One of the other major elements in the building is this new curtain wall that's going across here and connects with the original garden where the skating rink is. The floors are now seamless between the two. Anyone who might remember it from before, there was about a 2-foot drop. It was a kind of dark sunken pit. That is gone. It's totally seamless. But in putting in the envelope, what we also had to really recognize was the fact that one of the things that was so fantastic about it was that seamless connection. And so what we have put in a double glazed curtain wall. Every other 15-foot bay is roughly got this 15-foot by 15-foot square section of curtain wall that was engineered, and so the curtain wall actually slides back. So you have these 5 ginormous openings in it, as well as these oversized 10-foot doors. So in the summertime, those doors can be opened up. In the evening, they can leave it open overnight, and you've got the cool valley air coming in and cooling the slab, as well as during events, opening up the operable skylights above and getting that airflow in combination with some ceiling fans. You can see here again what that looks like. One of the things that was a bit frustrating at first, but then it became a bit liberating, was the fact that in a normal building, we might be really getting quite focused and fixated on some of the thermal bridging issues. And in this case, what was somewhat liberating was the fact that the entire building was a thermal bridge because we could never insulate the envelope. And so getting really caught up on the most, the best curtain wall details and which is the best profile was something that we were able to kind of set aside a little bit, which was interesting. And so one of the things that we did add in this building, which I think is really kind of fantastic, is a new gender-neutral washroom. This, it hit a lot of bells and or hit a lot of points for us. And one of the things which it did was allow us to minimize the amount of construction we were doing, because when we started to do the calculations, we were finding that the footprint of 2 gendered washrooms was getting really just massive. And the heritage people were getting very upset because they didn't want this new footprint in the building, but we also need to provide washrooms for a 1,000-person space. And what this now has is 22 gender-neutral washrooms. I think it's the biggest in Ontario right now. What you see here now is just in the very edge of the screen corner, that's the gender-neutral washroom. It's actually getting clad with some really fantastic white back-painted glass, like right today as we're speaking. And they're doing this really amazing gallery space as one of the programs within the kilns where you can actually go inside the original building. And so a lot of the approach to the whole project was, reducing the kind of energy loads by changing perceptions of comfort and temperature. I think we get about 15 degrees in the building in the dead of winter, and the real shift in thinking is, bring a sweater. That's the way and the image they're projecting. And part of that was doing a design that would set that level of expectation. You can't design a Class A office looking space and then say, oh, it's not going to be Class A conditioned. But you can take this kind of heritage building and say, look, this is what the building looks like. This is what it is. We're preserving it for a lot of reasons, and we're not going to condition it. Following that mindset was an idea about doing as little work as possible. And so in the gallery, instead of building a whole new space, what we've done is really done the only real demolition in a kind of serious way of the site was cutting open these portion of the kiln. We have a 10-meter spanning space within the kiln. It's my favorite space in the whole building. It is immensely intimate and took a lot of work. And what's really not apparent here is a lot of these diagonal pieces of steel here that are supporting these main kind of artifact elements of the drawing system. All that steel is new. They've essentially built a truss to hold up 3 feet of brick, which then supported those elements, and that was part of preserving the kind of original character of the building. You can see the kind of opening into the gallery, and again here, and this was a lot of work to negotiate with the heritage people how we were going to make this opening and the graffiti and put all the brick back in. And I remember being on site saying, oh my gosh, this is so amazing how they've kind of put it back together. You can tell the difference, but it doesn't stand out really poorly. And I said, who are the masons? Like, I got to know. You might not be surprised to hear, but they were really master masons, not from the Toronto market or Ontario. They were actually, in fact, the masonry company had hired on a number of master masons who had come to Canada as Syrian refugees, but they still had like this just immense attention to craft and detail. It was amazing. One thing that we are adding as another new element is this classroom mezzanine, which is the new future Center for Future Cities. In the kind of service of this carbon neutral agenda, a lot of the decisions on the materials were made a little bit on an intuitive basis because of the lack of time to really do a really detailed analysis. But this is one case in point where the classroom deck was proposed by the engineers to be in steel pan and concrete, and we said, no, this is the Centre for Future Cities. This has got to be cross-laminated timber. And so we ended up working with the City of Toronto's building department and applied for an alternative solution because we were 1% over the floor area allowing combustible construction, and the building code, believe it or not, doesn't allow you to discount the solid masonry footprint of the kilns that are not occupiable. So we went through a long process to convince the city that of course this should be allowed because this shouldn't be counted in our area. But it's a cross-laminated timber mezzanine that is supporting these classrooms. There's a large kind of space is the one, and a much smaller, more studio-based workspace as the other. And it creates this really amazing kind of new element inside the building with this vaulted ceiling, and you see the operable skylights here, and becomes a kind of really creative, collaborative space. And whereas the rest of the building is so kind of textured and raw, this is really moved towards a very clean white box kind of space. When Tom asked me to think of some takeaways for everyone, I kind of thought, like, who's doing a building like this, because this is kind of a one of a kind space. And so what I really tried to think about was, what are some approach-based kind of lessons to take away from this? And so I think the first is, when you've got a heritage building and you're trying to do something like this, that there needs to be real recognition that it's not a constraint necessarily. It brings limits, but it also brings latitude in a lot of different ways. And that had we not had this would have we wouldn't have necessarily rethought the approach to conditioning the space, which dropped our demand on the conditioning side tremendously. The other thing is not to overlook a kind of cultivating an attitude of use, and I think that played out in a number of different ways. One was this kind of idea about bring a sweater, like, it's going to be cold, bring a sweater, and dress appropriately. But the other thing is that approach to the storm infrastructure and the flood water in the building. And I really truly believe that had this building been done 10 years ago when they originally built out the site, we would not be able to have accomplished what we did today, because there would have been a very different approach to the flooding. But based on 10 years of experience operating that site in the floodwaters, really allowed Evergreen and ourselves and the whole consultant team to really take a different kind of out-of-the-box approach to things. And then I think the last point is really to set ambitious but appropriate goals and then prioritize them. And what I mean by that is, like, when we got the building, it was not appropriate to say this is going to be a LEED building or passive house. It just did not lend itself to that. But nonetheless, the Evergreen and ourselves and the whole team really wanted to have a really ambitious goal. And so the approach to being carbon neutral on the kind of energy side, and while we're not quite there, we're almost there, was the direction that we went. And then prioritizing, and what I mean by that is the recognition that in the context of this project, we couldn't do the kind of carbon analysis footprint of materials in the timeline we were given. And what we said was, like, that is not the priority of this project. There was a lot of other priorities, and that's where we have to focus our energy. And it's been a very long, complicated process to get here. We've kind of slowed down at various intervals, and we're almost done the project now. The roof is gearing up to go on in the early spring of next year, and we're hoping by summer the whole array of solar panels and system is really humming along. And I wanted to thank you for your attention, and I'm really grateful to share this project with everyone. Thank you.